We're recording right now.
We're rolling.
All right.
Awesome.
Okay.
Rock on. Well, we got IT in the house finally. Welcome everybody to the next edition of Guest Rose, the virtual edition. Say edition twice. We are graciously sitting here with Gregg Snider. He's senior IT infrastructure manager here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it says on my business cards.
That's what. Yeah, exactly. That's what it says on your outgoing messages.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us. This is going to be a treat.
Thanks for having me,
This
guys.
is cool too. You're our first, I think officially our first IT guest on the show, which is pretty cool and a fitting one because you're probably one of our first IT employees at Indigo.
Number two.
Number two. All right.
Yeah.
Not number one, but all right. Yep. We'll take it.
You can't be number one. You might as well be number two.
All right. I like it.
That makes me the what do you call it? The Jonathan Frakes of the Starship Indigo.
Love it.
It's there. You're there.
Deeply nerdy reference. Sorry. Sorry.
I'm sure that landed with the most of our folks here. So
yeah, exactly.
For all those other people out in that's watching that don't know who you are, give us kind of the unpack that a little bit more of who you are and what do you do here?
So as Brad alluded to, my name is Gregg Snider. I am part of the IT infrastructure team, and what that encompasses is a lot of stuff. Some of it is what a lot of people would think of as kind of plumbing, if you will. I manage all of our networks, our firewalls, our wireless, in all of the different offices around the globe at this point. I've been to all of our offices. I was actually scheduled to go and do the setup for the European office, and literally the timing was right on the cusp, and the people team said no travel, so it's about the only place I haven't set up yet. So a lot of that is behind the scenes things most people don't see or think about, but we've built that from the ground up. We manage it on a sort of day-to-day basis. Other not super exciting stuff like access control and the key card systems, things like that. We manage all of the AV systems, all of the Zoom rooms in all of our conference rooms. So that's a big chunk of what we do. Another big chunk has been the entire infrastructure team, not just myself, is infrastructure as a service. And what I mean by that is, traditional infrastructure would mean we had a huge data center in an office somewhere with tons of racks full of gear and servers and hard drives to manage all of the applications that we use, databases, analytical tools, storage, etc. The way we do it here is all of that lives in a cloud environment, which just means it's a server in somebody else's data center. We don't own the hardware. We don't maintain it. We just reap the benefits of having that computing power, storage capacity in other locations. So things like Amazon Web Services that host all of our Indigo applications, things like analytic tools, Snowflake, several others as well. Our entire email system and all of our storage system is done on Microsoft's cloud. So whenever you get an email, send an email, save files to the people drive, to the IT drive, instead of being on a server somewhere in Boston or Memphis, it's sitting in a Microsoft data center. So our team manages all of that on a day-to-day basis, on an architecture basis, on a project planning for when we need to roll out new things. I personally have the bulk of my responsibility is in the networking side of things. But for example, right now I'm working with the people team to tightly integrate the Workday HR information systems with our corporate directory. So a lot of different things.
As a member of the people team, I thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Don't thank me yet until we get it working.
Okay, then I might have some bones to pick with you.
It's still in testing.
All right, we'll bring you back on to say thank you once it's done.
Okay, absolutely. Thanks. So before we jump into some nitty gritty things, and to take it a layer deeper on the intro. What's one thing people really wouldn't know about you?
Personally or professionally?
Personally. I want to get to know
Personally.
Gregg as a person.
For reals?
For reals.
Okay.
Bring it.
So folks on my team know this, but probably not many other people. I'm going to out myself here. Probably not many other people in the company know I am a photographer, and I am also a cosplayer, which I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about.
No.
So I don't know how well you can see it in the background here. I have built a small set, if you will, in my loft where I work day to day. I cosplay Hagrid from the Harry Potter series, hence letting the beard grow to semi-epic proportions.
I love it.
And the reason I built this was that it just ended this week, but part of a huge Facebook group, about 35,000 people, I have been reading a chapter a night from one of the Harry Potter books to whoever, a couple hundred people a night were tuning in as part of a try and keep people engaged and connected and not bored while we're all sort of stuck in lockdown. So I get to play dress up every night.
That's
wow.
Awesome. All right. In the
epic.
show notes, we're going to include the next reading from Gregg.
There you go. Yeah, for sure. Quick question on this before we dive in. Is there, when you do these readings, do you take on a particular voice or do you read it in your own voice?
Yeah. Are you Hagrid when you do it?
I am Hagrid.
Wow.
Thankfully I can do a fairly passable Yorkshire accent. I can't do Oxford. I can't do Eton. I do a truly lousy Cockney, but my Irish and English friends that have tuned in have said I do a passably good North Country. And in real time, I can't do what audiobook narrators do, where you read as a character and then you probably take a break and you get into the headspace of the voice of the next character you're reading. It's too hard to try and jump between a deep male accent and a higher female voice or register. So I've been reading it all in sort of the same thing, but I'm trying to actually act it and not just sort of statically sit there and read off the page. So yeah, I'm all in.
That's awesome. All right.
We're not going to make you.
Yeah, we're not going to make you do it. We'll need some suspense for everybody. So yeah, it's the hook that they tune in. Yeah, the next episode. No, it's the hook to get more subscribers.
Big market tease.
I did not know that. That's cool.
That's awesome. In the days where I used to listen to sports talk radio before that melted my brain completely. That's what they jokingly, actually it might be a real industry term, is when you're going to commercial, you drop that little kernel that's going to get them to come back after their 60-second, 90-second timeout.
That's awesome. All right. Whew.
So we're not going to learn anything about IT today, but we're going to learn an awful lot about how to keep your viewers and your listeners on target.
Yeah, throw away what we thought this was going to be.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
All right. I do want us though to touch on everything you mentioned before we went down that very interesting. I don't even want to call it a rabbit hole because that was some real meat. But talk to us. I mean, you mentioned a little bit kind of about the cloud infrastructure and how that's what you work on. Talk to us though a little bit about like how that came to be.
Sure.
The decision process and how you were mentioning this earlier today. How that's tied into the state we're in now, where we're all fully remote.
Absolutely. So I think I mentioned this. I started in January of 2016. So I believe it was. So I was number 2 in the IT group. Number 1 being Raul Diaz, who I'm sure most people are familiar with also.
Shout out to Raul.
At the time, we were in CIC space in Cambridge, and it was like 40 people. And our all hands meetings were literally everyone dragged a chair into a little space. And Neil or Pranav or occasionally Katie would do a 15-minute all hands meeting. It was all turnkey. So all of the internet, network, wireless, printers, all the usual stuff. It was like walking into a WeWork space, so to speak. As part of that, and because we weren't in a financial position at that stage to build out a lot of, to build a data center in-house. We started at that point with Microsoft Office 365. So that's your email, OneDrive, SharePoint for documents, for a lot of forms and systems that we built at the time. And as we continued to grow, and then as we moved from Cambridge to our Boston office in Charlestown, and then obviously as we expanded into Memphis and other locations, it drastically cut down on the amount of time and cost to expand that to new locations. In a more traditional, call it several years ago, when you had data centers everywhere, you either have to build systems in all of those offices, or you typically would spend a lot of money to get telecom lines that connect office A and B and C and wherever else, so that data can flow between all of those offices while you're there. But because of everything being in the cloud, literally all we need for an office is internet access. And by extension, and this is one of the things I know we wanted to touch on in general, because you can access effectively all of those things with a laptop and an internet connection, when we had to stop going into an office and working from our lofts, our bedrooms, our living rooms, everything was already effectively in place. I'd love to take credit and say, oh yeah, 5 years ago, we were thinking we're all going to be working from home because of some global medical crisis, but obviously this was just a good silver lining, if you will. But in fairness, that was also some of the calculus that went into it early on was around disaster planning. That's part of what infrastructure and security teams tend to do, business continuity and disaster planning. By which I mean everything from, if I delete a file, how do I get it back? That's a very basic example of backup and recovery, to something major happens, a server gets, a hard drive crashes in a server, how do you get that back? All the way up to wild pie in the sky worst case scenarios, like what if 500 Rutherford burned to the ground? If I'd say knock on wood, but my desk is made out of laminate, so I don't think that counts.
I'll do it for you.
There you go. Thank you. Low probability, but highly important to plan for that small possible scenario, or what happens if an asteroid hits Charlestown and the building is vaporized. A lot of the calculus behind continuing to do everything in the cloud, as opposed to a couple of, maybe tipping point is a little too strong of a word, but inflection points, if you will, where the decision was, can we do it in-house or do we do it in the cloud? That informed our thinking about keeping things in the cloud. Is if for whatever reason the Boston office or the Memphis office or the RTP lab becomes unavailable for X amount of time, what do we do about that? So while, in the disaster planning bingo board, no one had global pandemic, it's always, if the building burns down or if there's an extended power failure, more predictable types of disaster planning. But long story short, that thinking and that calculus definitely informed our sticking with things like Zoom from an early point, rather than I've worked in other offices where it's all very proprietary, in-house, expensive Cisco equipment that we couldn't do what we're literally doing right now, which is 3 people on a Zoom call. Yeah. Our phone system, for the folks in Memphis that are on customer service lines, that are on sales lines, our help desk, for example, there's an 800 number that people can call if they need to call our help desk. 100% virtual, it's technically it's not virtual, there's servers somewhere, but from our perspective, it's all in the cloud, it's all hosted. So the fact that we can't get into any of these offices has basically had zero impact, maybe 1 or 2% impact on business continuity.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking as you talk. It reminds me of our the when we spoke with Wally, you know, he was talking, because he's located in Austin as an engineer, and he was talking about, you know, for him working remote, just taking advantage of the tools that are readily available, right, and using them, and how he was praising, I'll let you know, he was praising, you know, the IT team, you know, to that giving us these tools. But when we did make that switch a couple months, you know, now what, a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, maybe, you know, since early March,
6 weeks.
Yeah, 6 weeks. So like, what was that transition like? What were some of that 1%, right, of those things that were, you know, the hardest in terms of a transition period for allowing everyone to be remote and still be connected for everything?
Okay. So the first thing that sort of the IT team in general was looking at is, how do we make sure people know how to connect with the help desk? Because the reality is, if your computer doesn't turn on properly, you're probably just going to walk over to, you know, Rich and Kiamar if you're in Boston, or Amir and his team if you're in Memphis.
Shout out,
possible.
They do a great job.
Shout out to the help desk guys, absolutely. Make sure people know how to get to there. So we did things like, very, very simple, like updating the SharePoint homepage that has, here's the email, here's the ticketing system, here's the phone number. Did the same thing with, I was going to say Sarah, but the Sarahs in the people team, to make sure that information was on the route. Developed a process for signing out a monitor, a webcam. I don't even know if we had those, but like, you know, if you want to take home the stuff that's on your desk to make it easier to work, we wanted a way to be able to sign that out. So we were able to pull that together fairly quickly. But those are low-hanging fruit. The only real challenge, and this has been fairly manageable, is that so all of our AWS and related stuff that lives in AWS, to connect to that, you have to have a VPN connection. You have to, it has to be encrypted, secure, etc. If you're in the office, we take care of that at the network level. So if you're on Indigo Wi-Fi, the connection to AWS exists. If you're not, if you're working from home, if you're on a train, wherever, you have to use a VPN app to connect into AWS and related resources. There were people who had never done that before because they didn't really work remotely or rarely needed to do anything while they weren't during sort of common business hours. So some of that was helping people get through that. Some of that was working on ways to improve it. There's a couple of things that are in testing right now that should further help that I don't think are kind of released to the general public. So I'll just say we're working on additional ways to improve that. Those were probably the bigger challenges. And then just some of the questions around, I know it came up at an all hands, is it okay to use my corporate Zoom account if I want to have, have my entire family do a video call that's going to last more than 40 minutes on a free account? Beyond that, I mean, there may be things that going all the way up to Michelle's level as CIO that he has on his roadmap that I'm not personally aware of, but that's really been the bulk of it. And everything else has been kind of operational. You know, my keyboard broke, I need a new keyboard, or my laptop doesn't boot anymore, can help desk get me a new laptop? From an architecture, from a systems and an infrastructure standpoint, very little.
So it's wild. Yeah. I mean,
I was going to say,
go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, my closer question that I had prepped for you was, what's something that you're most proud of from your work at Indigo? But that feels like a weird question to ask right now, because that's like something like that you should already be very proud of, what you just said, the fact that was such a, from what you described, relatively seamless transition, without having known that this pandemic was going to come up. That's awesome.
Thanks. It's definitely a team effort. I've obviously played had a big role in a lot of that, but there's way too much for any 1, 2, 3 people to do. And the fact that our our infrastructure team is the size it is actually, it's funny. That's when people say, well, what's one of the big benefits of having cloud? Sorry, I'm shifting gears a tiny bit here. That in and of itself means we don't have to have 4, 6, 10 system admins that do nothing but sort of day-to-day care and feeding of a bunch of servers, and doing backups where you've got, it's not the most flattering term, but commonly referred to as a tape monkey, whose job it is to go in every day and pull out a rack full of backup tapes, swap them out, label them, and go through this whole complex backup architecture. That's a full-time job in a lot of places. Because we don't have any of those needs in-house, we don't have to have, we're lean and mean, I guess is the best way to put it. So with the team of folks that we have and the relatively small size of it, we've been able to get an awful lot of pretty key projects like that done, that have enabled us to move pretty seamlessly into working from home.
How big is the team at this point?
So the infrastructure team in and of itself, Raul, myself, so we've got Mike Spofford is our AWS guru, and then John Lombardo and Alan Langer are our, I would guess you would call them sort of our sysadmins. They handle a lot of the infrastructure tickets that get submitted, a lot of the day-to-day stuff. They've been instrumental in projects that let us do remote management of computers. So if something is wrong, the ability to log into a computer from somewhere else to try and fix it. We work very closely with like James Lyon and Kurt on the security team to make sure that we can, outside of the office, that we can continue to ensure data security, hardware security. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4,
maybe
5.
10.
So
Or five.
five people on the infrastructure team proper.
Yeah, that's wild.
Wow.
And I know Indigo is just north of 1,000 employees with 5 offices, right? That's an impressive feat in itself. But also, me and Caroline and on the recruiting side see it all the time with new people being onboarded, right? And that seamless of a transition. And every Monday when we have people start, even now, it's like it is dialed in, right? And there's nothing there. So
thank you.
Yeah.
See, I'll take that much credit, because when there was the IT team was me and Raul and Mike Sicardo, we, Mike and I tag teamed that stuff for a long time, until we grew to the point where our help desk guys could take that over. So we kind of, started it from the ground level, but we were able to hand it off to Kiamar and Rich and the help desk guys, and they, pick up the ball and run with it.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. All right, we're gonna have to get them on next.
Absolutely.
This has been awesome, Greg. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. God.
This is really
we
cool.
could do this all day. There's so much more we need to unpack on that, and we will now. So
sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anything else you want to go over? Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to.
Yeah, we're gonna bring you back. Don't worry.
Cool. Okay. I will literally be here.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, and part 2, you might have to jump into the Hagrid persona.
Ooh.
I could do it.
Perfect. Well,
good.
Awesome.
Always ready.
If we can get J.K. Rowling to get involved and do a charity benefit for us, so we could help some people somewhere around here. Yeah, we can make that happen.
All right, I'll write her a letter. I'll see what happens.
We'll work on it.
Perfect. Tell her I said hi.
I will. Awesome. No, thanks again, Greg. This is wild. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Cool. Anytime. Take care.
All right. Bye.